June 6, 1944. Not Normandy. The Celebes Sea, south of the Philippines. A 311-foot American submarine named USS Harder is running on the surface at night in the middle of heavily patrolled Japanese waters, and her commanding officer, Commander Samuel David Dealey, has just done something that no American submarine commander was supposed to do. He has turned toward the destroyer that is hunting him. The Japanese destroyer Minazuki was one of the most valuable escort ships in the Imperial Japanese Navy's Western Pacific Fleet. She displaced 1,500 tons. She carried depth charges and anti-submarine crews trained to kill submarines exactly like the Harder. The standard American doctrine in 1944 was simple and clear. When a destroyer turns toward you, you dive, you run silent, you pray. You do not fire torpedoes at an approaching destroyer at a range of 1,100 yards. Dealey fired 3 torpedoes at a range of 1,100 yards. 2 hit. Minazuki was gone in 5 minutes. This is not the most extraordinary thing Dealey would do that week. The next morning, June 7th, he turned toward a second destroyer. Hyanami. 1 torpedo hit her amidships and detonated her magazine. The Naval History and Heritage Command's official records describe what happened next. She sank in under a minute. Dealey's patrol report noted the explosion with the same tone a mechanic might use to describe a carburetor swap. On June 9th, he turned toward a third. Tanakays. 4 torpedoes fired. 2 hit. Her boilers erupted. She was gone. 3 Japanese destroyers sunk in 4 days. 2 more heavily damaged in the same patrol area. A 5th claimed in the same week by a combination of hits and a down-the-throat attack at 1,500 yards that left Harder diving at 80 feet when the detonations rolled through the hull. And here is the part that Japanese Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa could not explain to his own staff. He had sent those destroyers to find the submarine. Each time they found it, they stopped existing. By June 11th, Ozawa, commanding the Japanese fleet anchored at Taui, had convinced himself there was not one American submarine in the area. There were many. He could not explain any other way how his destroyer screen, 5 ships in 4 days, had simply vanished. He ordered the fleet to depart Taui a full day early. That decision upset the timing of the entire Japanese battle plan for the Philippine Sea. It forced Ozawa to slow his carrier force, cost the Japanese their tactical synchronization, and contributed directly to the catastrophic Japanese defeat in the Battle of the Philippine Sea 11 days later. The battle American pilots would nickname the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The battle that eliminated Japan's carrier aviation as a serious fighting force for the rest of the war. 1 submarine, 1 patrol, 1 commanding officer who turned toward the thing that was supposed to kill him. This is the story of the USS Harder. And to understand what Dealey built on that submarine, and why it worked, and why no Japanese admiral in 1944 had a category for what he was doing, you have to go back before the war. The standard American submarine doctrine entering World War II was cautious. Submarines existed to sink cargo ships. Tankers, transport, the unglamorous freighters that kept an island empire supplied with oil and steel and rice. Destroyers were the enemy of submarines. They were fast, they were armed with depth charges, they carried sonar, and the Navy had spent 20 years telling submarine commanders that engaging a destroyer was a mission profile that ended with 79 men at the bottom of the ocean. Prior to April 1944, that doctrine made sense. The problem was that Japan was running out of destroyers. Not slowly. Critically. The battles around the Solomon Islands from 1942 through 1943 had consumed Japanese destroyer strength at a rate the Imperial Japanese Navy had not anticipated and could not replace. American codebreakers working from the Ultra-Intelligence Program had read the dispatch traffic. They understood before most Japanese admirals understood it that Japan had an acute shortage of destroyer escorts. The convoys that fed the empire were increasingly sailing with inadequate screening forces. The fleet operations that required destroyer screens were increasingly operating shorthanded. In April 1944, the calculation changed. An intelligence assessment reached submarine command. Sinking Japanese destroyers was now more strategically valuable than sinking cargo ships. Destroyers could not be replaced quickly. Cargo ships could. The force multiplier ran the other way. Dealey had already been arguing for a patrol assignment near the main Japanese fleet anchorage at Taui. He had a reason. Taui was where the Japanese fleet had to go to refuel on Borneo crude, because the home island's refineries were being strangled by American submarines sinking tankers. The fleet and its destroyer screen would be concentrated in one place, operating in restricted waters, patrolling predictable routes. Dealey understood what that meant for a submarine commander willing to close the range. He departed Fremantle, Australia, on May 26, 1944. To understand what Samuel Dealey did differently from other submarine commanders, you have to understand one number. The average American submarine in the Pacific attacked approximately 3 Japanese ships per patrol and sank fewer than 1. That is the average. Patrols without kills. Patrols with 1 sinking. The mathematics of a war being ground out by attrition and luck, and the brutal arithmetic of torpedoes that sometimes ran too deep, or failed to detonate, or curved off course. Harder sank more than 4 ships per patrol on her first 4 patrols. The reason was not the submarine. The Harder was a Gatto-class boat, identical in construction to dozens of others commissioned at the same time. She came off the ways at Groton, Connecticut, in December of 1942. She had the same Mark 14 torpedoes that frustrated submarine crews across the Pacific, torpedoes whose depth-keeping mechanisms ran too deep and whose magnetic exploders often failed. She had the same FM sonar, the same radar, the same diesel-electric propulsion system, the same 21-inch torpedo tubes that every other Gatto-class boat carried into the Pacific. The difference was Dealey. He had developed, through 4 patrols, a specific understanding of destroyer attack geometry that the doctrinal manuals had not caught up to. A destroyer on an attack run at a submarine is committed. She is accelerating, straightening her course to prosecute the contact, moving through the water on a line that is, for a brief window measured in seconds, predictable. At that moment, from the submarine's perspective, the incoming destroyer presents a target geometry that is in some ways more favorable than a cargo ship steaming at a steady 12 knots. She is close, she is on a known bearing, and she has no time to maneuver away from a torpedo fired into her path. Dealey called it the down-the-throat shot. Fire into the face of an oncoming attacker. It required holding nerve while the range closed from 1,200 yards to 900 yards to 650 yards. It required accepting that if the torpedoes missed, the destroyer would be over you before you could get deep enough to matter. He had fired that shot in April 1944 against the destroyer Ikazuchi. He had waited until the range was 900 yards. He had hit with 2 of the 4 torpedoes he fired. Ikazuchi sank, and her depth charges exploded as she went down, and there were no survivors. Dealey's patrol report on the sinking became one of the most famous lines in American submarine history. He wrote, "Expended 4 torpedoes and 1 Jap destroyer." That is a sentence written by a man who has reclassified a destroyer as ammunition. By June of 1944, Dealey had taken that tactical knowledge into the most target-rich patrol area in the Pacific, and he had begun to use it at a pace that the Japanese could not process. On June 6th, Minazuki turned to attack. 2 torpedoes. 5 minutes. Gone. On June 7th, Hyanami turned to attack. 1 torpedo to the magazine. Under a minute. Gone. On June 8th, Harder moved to the coast of northeastern Borneo and evacuated 6 British coast watchers who had been ashore behind Japanese lines. This is not a side note. It is the character of the crew and their commander. In the middle of a week that was dismantling the Japanese destroyer screen for the Philippine Sea, Dealey took time to go inshore, lower a boat under enemy fire, and bring home men who had been cut off for months. On June 9th, Tanakays turned to attack. 2 hits. Boilers exploding. Gone. On June 10th, a Japanese submarine chaser turned toward Harder and fired. Dealey ordered 3 torpedoes down the throat at 1,500 yards and immediately crash-dived. The detonation shockwave rolled through the hull at 80 feet. The chaser was gone. The patrol report filed at Darwin on July 3rd read like an inventory of the destroyed. At the Japanese fleet anchorage, Ozawa was reading a different kind of inventory. 5 escort ships in 4 days. No contact reports from any of them. No pattern he could explain with a single submarine. He transmitted his conclusion to Tokyo. The waters around Tai were infested. He moved the fleet. The Naval History and Heritage Command's official history notes that Harder's depredations so rattled Ozawa that he became convinced multiple submarines were operating around the anchorage. The premature departure of the fleet disrupted Japanese timing and contributed to the defeat in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Historians of the Pacific War credit Harder's 5th Patrol with strategic consequences that reached far beyond the tonnage of 5 destroyers. Admiral Raymond Spruance received Dealey-S reconnaissance report on June 11th. He had exact numbers: Ozawa-S carrier strength, the fleet-S composition, where it was and where it was going. Spruance used that intelligence in planning the engagement that would become the Turkey Shoot. Dealey was awarded his 5th Navy Cross when Harder returned to Darwin. He immediately began planning the 6th Patrol. There is a temptation, looking at what Samuel Dealey did in the Celebes Sea in the first week of June 1944, to frame it as the story of a man who was not afraid. That frame misses something. Fear is not relevant to what he built. What he built was a decision framework that other submarine commanders did not have, and that framework rested on 4 years of calculation, not 4 years of absence of fear. The calculation was this: a destroyer prosecuting a contact is, for a window of seconds, predictable. In that window, a submarine commander who holds his nerve long enough to close the range below 1,000 yards has an attack geometry that functions in his favor. The cost of getting to that geometry is accepting the psychological experience of watching a destroyer fill your periscope field of view. The cost of not getting there is firing from range, missing, and dying anyway. He had done the math. He had concluded the close shot was survivable. He had proven it 4 times. And then he had taken that proof into the waters where the Japanese fleet most needed its destroyer screen intact, and had begun to work. The men who served under him on the Harder understood what they were part of. The submarine had a motto: hit 'em harder. It was not a boast. It was a technical program. The 6th Patrol began on August 5th, 1944. Harder departed Fremantle for the South China Sea east of Luzon. On August 22nd, she sank 2 Japanese escort ships, Matsuwa and Hiburi, off Manila. 2 more ships. The inventory continued. On August 24th, in Dasal Bay off the Philippines, Harder and her companion ship USS Hake were operating against a convoy. A Japanese escort vessel, CD-22, turned toward them. Hake dove deep and went silent. Harder moved to engage. She fired 3 torpedoes. CD-22 evaded them. CD-22 dropped 5 depth charges in rapid sequence. Japanese records state that the 5th found the Harder. The oil and wood chips and cork that floated to the surface afterward were the last evidence of 79 men and the submarine they had made famous. Samuel Dealey was 40 years old. He was from Dallas, Texas. He had graduated from the Naval Academy in 1930. He had spent 14 years in the peacetime Navy learning the slow arithmetic of institutional advancement, and he had spent 2 years in the Pacific learning a different kind of arithmetic. He had concluded, at some point in those 2 years, that the standard doctrine was wrong, and that the wrong doctrine was going to cost American lives, and that the correct response was to develop a better one and apply it until either the doctrine was proven or the war was over. He was killed before the war was over. His widow, Edwina, received the Medal of Honor on August 29, 1945. The citation covered the 5th War Patrol, the 5 destroyers in 4 days. The decision to turn toward the thing that was supposed to kill him. There is a detail in the official Naval History and Heritage Command record of the Ikazuchi sinking, the first destroyer Dealey killed in April 1944, that belongs in this story. Before the war, in the aftermath of the Battle of the Java Sea in 1942, Ikazuchi had pulled 422 survivors of the British cruiser HMS Exeter and the destroyer HMS Encounter out of the water. In an engagement in which the Japanese could simply have left them to drown, Ikazuchi's crew had rescued them. Her captain had made a different kind of decision than doctrine required. In April 1944, 900 yards away, Samuel Dealey fired 4 torpedoes into the onrushing Ikazuchi and sent her to the bottom. He had no way of knowing the history. He knew only the geometry. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, which Harder's 5th Patrol helped to shape, was fought on June 19 and 20, 1944. The Japanese lost 3 aircraft carriers, over 600 aircraft, and the experienced aircrew cadres that had built Japanese carrier aviation into the dominant force of 1941. The Americans lost 109 aircraft and 76 aviators. The disparity became a historical fact. The Turkey Shoot became a name that shorthand for what happened when one side lost the ability to compete in a domain it had once owned. The USS Harder is credited in post-war accounting with sinking a confirmed 25 ships, a calculation that includes shared credit for some vessels. She received the Presidential Unit Citation and 6 battle stars. She was found in 2024, sitting upright on the floor of the South China Sea at a depth of more than 3,000 feet, with depth charge damage aft of the conning tower. The men are still inside. Admiral Ozawa never publicly explained, in the months after the Battle of the Philippine Sea, exactly why he had moved his fleet from Tawi-Tawi a day early. He did not have a clean explanation. He had a reasonable one. The waters were infested with American submarines. The intelligence picture supported that conclusion. The fleet was in danger. He was not wrong, exactly. The waters were infested. By one, the Japanese Navy's doctrine for anti-submarine warfare in 1944 had not been built around the possibility of a submarine commander who, when the destroyer turned toward him, turned back. Their doctrine was built around the standard geometry. Submarine evades, submarine dives, submarine attempts to escape. The depth charge pattern is laid on the last known position. The boat either survives or it does not. When Harder turned toward the destroyer, she exited the frame of the doctrine entirely. She became a problem the doctrine had no procedure for. The Japanese destroyers that found her in June 1944 had sonar contacts and attack procedures and trained crews. They did not have a contingency for the contact that closed the range and fired into their approach. That is why 5 destroyers could find one submarine and disappear. Not because Samuel Dealey was unafraid. Because he had worked out a geometry that the doctrine said was impossible and had tested it enough times to know it was not. The destroyer escort USS Dealey, commissioned in 1953, was named after him. His submarine was found, intact, 3,000 feet down, 80 years after it was lost. The patrol reports still exist. The coordinates are exact. The math is documented in the files. If you stayed to the end of this story, a like keeps it visible. There are more records like this one. Most of them are about ordinary calculations that changed everything, made by men who did not survive to be interviewed. Their names belong in the record. Subscribe so the next one finds you.